Tuli, Shoret Sedek Avoivom, Oide Yoze Hashar, Ladoinoi Zadikim Yevoi Voi, Ayay Bisuli, Shoret Sedek Avoivom, Oide Yoze Hashar, La Hashem Tzadikim Yevoyu La la yoy 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 Ay ya ra 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 ay ay yoy Ay na ra 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 yoy 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 Ay ya ra 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 ay ay ya ra 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 ram bam bam ba rai rai ram Ay ya ra 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 yoy 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 Oy ya ra 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 yoy 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 ay ya ra 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 yoy yoy ya ra 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 ram. That's Baruch Chait's melody. Open the gates of righteousness. It's from Hallel, actually. We sing that every day during Sukkot when we do Hallel. It's Psalm 118. It's a great story how that tune was written. Rabbi Baruch Chait, many, many years ago, had a regular kumsitz singing and sharing Torah in Baltimore. And there was a boy that would come with his father. And he was obviously very sick. And at a certain point, they realized he wasn't just sick. I mean, he was a young man who wasn't long for this world. And they told Rabbi Chait that sadly he wasn't only sick with cancer, but a very painful cancer. The kid was really suffering and wasting away. And his father told Rabbi Chait that the only thing that gave the boy relief from his pain, from his fear, from his woe, his sadness, was coming to these musical evenings. Baruch Chait, very famous composer of Jewish music, of great songs. We use his melodies even in our liturgy. And so it became very special to them to share music with this boy. And at a certain point, having been coming there for a while, the boy said to Baruch Chait, "Write a melody for me." And Rabbi Chait said, I'll work on it. The boy said, "No, do it. Write a melody for me." And Rabbi Chait, do you have a verse that you want the melody for? And the boy chose this verse from Psalm 118. Imagine this boy and what he was going through. And the words are, "I shall not die, but I shall live and relate the deeds of God. God has chastened me exceedingly, but he did not let me die. Open the gates of righteousness for me. I will enter them and thank God. This is the gate of Hashem, the righteous shall enter. Through it I thank you, for you have answered me and become my salvation." It's just chilling. We heard Rabbi Chait, he told us that story personally during a visit when he was performing in LA. It was incredible. How's everybody doing? It's great to be learning with you on a Thursday. Hoshana Rabbah is settling in around us. Very exciting with God's help. We're going to have a huge musical celebration at our shul tomorrow. And God willing, I'll be able to share some video from that. So watch for that. I'll probably go live tomorrow. I'm guessing 10, 11 o'clock in the morning LA time. Schedule could change. Hoshana Rabbah is very fluid. But it's going to be a musical hallel led by Moshe Storch with instruments. It's something you can do on Hoshana Rabbah. I've been live before on that day from the Happy Minyan and Pico Robertson, but the Happy Minyan, who's usually led by Yehuda Solomon. Yehuda Solomon made Aliyah. He's back in Israel, and so the Happy Minyan people are coming to our show tomorrow, and it's going to be a huge Carl Bach, melodies and other Baruch Chait melodies. I've already requested from Moshe that we do this peacefully during Hallel tomorrow, and it should be big and uplifting, please God. Watch for that. Okay, let's light up the darkness. New wisdom candle. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Hoshana Rabbah coming in around us. Yehuda in South Carolina, Paul in Chicago, Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, Carla in Brazil, Sharon in New Jersey, Ryan in Florida, right? Paul in the Great Northwest, Bell in Texas, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Leona in Illinois, David in Indiana, Shandora in the Bronx, Karen in Northern California, Viva in Massachusetts, Bella in Florida, John in Scotland, Marjorie in Virginia, Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Great daf today. Challenging, but the kind that, like, okay, we get it, and we get why it's challenging and why it's worth it, and it's really interesting and relevant and applicable. Okay, we picked this up at 51b. So we've been discussing Mishnah number 8 here in chapter 2. Our daf today is page 52. And our Mishnah said that one who tries to betroth a woman and her daughter or two sisters, there's no betrothal at all. We've been discussing what's the reason for that. Is it because things that cannot be done sequentially also cannot be done simultaneously? You can't betroth a woman. You can do that, but then you can't also betroth her sister, so you can't do it sequentially, and therefore you can't do it simultaneously. Or is it that betrothal that cannot lead to consummation because you cannot sleep with your wife's sister, and you can't marry her, you can't consummate with her, and therefore the attempt to betroth her is no betrothal at all? Is that the reasoning for it? So we've been having this discussion, and now the Gemara suggests, come in here a proof from the continuation of that Mishnah in the case of two unrelated men who betrothed two sisters, where this one does not know which sister he betrothed, and that one does not know which sister he betrothed. Okay, so because it's uncertain who betrothed who, they need to part company. Maybe they're going to start over again and get married, but they got to get back to ground zero, as it were. So they have to undo these betrothals of uncertainty. And since two guys betroth a sister, one of two sisters, but they're not sure which, everyone needs a get, right? Everyone needs a get. Two unrelated men who betrothed two sisters, where this one does not know which sister he betrothed, and that man does not know which sister he betrothed. So this man gives two bills of divorce, two gets, one to each of the women, and the other man also gives two gets, one to each of the women. Their betrothal is not given to consummation, since they're not allowed to marry these people because they became mingled. So it would seem that this is a proof that betrothal that is not possible to consummate is not betrothal, right? But no, it seems like if they need a get, then that would mean that betrothal that cannot lead to consummation is betrothal because it requires a get, a bill of divorce to undo it. Their betrothal is not given to consummation. So according to Rava, why do they require a bill of divorce? And the Gemara answers here too. It is discussing a case where they were identified and later intermingled. The men knew who they betrothed when they created the betrothal. Later they forgot and couldn't figure it out. Something went wrong, and that's why they now have to divorce these betrothals because they're uncertain. But there was a valid betrothal in the beginning. It's that later the women became, misidentified, intermingled. So the actual betrothal was given to consummation. Therefore, the sisters are betrothed due to uncertainty, and that's why we need the gets. And the Gemara comments, the language of the Mishnah is also precise, as it teaches using the phrase, the man or the men do not know. The man does not know, indicating that at one point he did know who it was that he betrothed, but now he does not know. And the Mishnah does not teach it is not known. And the Gemara affirms, learn from it, that we are indeed dealing with a case where the sisters were identified at the beginning and later intermingled. So the Gemara asks, if so, what is the purpose of stating this? What novel halacha, what novel law does this teach? And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to teach the latter clause of that Mishnah. If each man died before he divorced, and this one had a brother, and that one had a brother, then this brother performs chalitza with both of the women, and that brother performs chalitza with both of them. Neither man may perform levirate marriage with them, lest he perform levirate marriage with the sister of his yavama. If this one had one brother and that one had two brothers, the one brother performs chalitza with both of them, and the two brothers, one performs chalitza with one of the sisters, and the other brother, if he desires, performs levirate marriage with the other sister. If they married the widows before consulting the court does not remove them from the marriage, and they are permitted to remain married. Now we're in 52a. And the Gemara explains the novelty of the latter clause. This is effective specifically if one of the two brothers first performs chalitza, releasing the widow of a man who died before he had children but left a brother. The chalitza ceremony releases the levirate obligation between this widow and her brother-in-law, or they perform yibum and get married, right? So this is effective specifically if one of the two brothers first performs chalitza and afterward the other brother performs yibum. But if one of the two brothers first performs yibum and afterward the other one performs chalitza, then the yibum would not take effect, as he is possibly encountering a yevama, the widow of his brother, who is getting married to a member of the public. And this is because it is possible that the woman he married was not his yevama, but someone else's yevama. And until the other man's brother performs chalitza with her, it is still prohibited for her to marry other men. In other words, this situation where these two men betrothed these two sisters and now they're not sure who they betrothed creates so much uncertainty that we have to go out of our way to make sure everybody gets a get so that nobody is bound to anyone else. Or if one of the men dies and has brothers, we have to perform chalitza to make sure everyone is released, and now the women are free to marry who they want to marry, and the men are free to marry who they want to marry, and if they want to marry each other, they can do that. But first we have to undo the betrothals of uncertain status. Now, the Gemara derives a proof. Come in here. As the sage Tav Yume taught the following baraisa: if this man had 5 sons and that man had 5 daughters, and the first man said, one of your daughters is betrothed to one of my sons, right? But they're not sure which, so they're going to have to undo it to remove the uncertainty. And how are they going to do that? Well, each and every one of the daughters requires 5 gets. Each daughter requires a get from each of the 5 sons, due to the uncertainty of who is betrothed to whom. If one of the sons died before giving his get, each and every one of the daughters requires 4 gets, one from each of the surviving brothers, and chalitza from one of them, in case she was betrothed to the son who died. The chalitza of one of the brothers suffices to release her from her levirate bond. According to Rava, this betrothal should not be valid, as it is not given to consummation. Why then do they each require bills of divorce? Now, the conflict between Rava and Abaye, Rava says that betrothal, which cannot lead to a marriage and a consummation, is not betrothal at all. Abaye says in certain cases it does create betrothal, even though it's a betrothal that cannot lead to marriage or consummation. Nevertheless, it does create a betrothal that requires a get. Rava versus Abaye, when there are debates, arguments, debates between Rava and Abaye, Rava is always right? The law follows Rava. He's sort of the senior member who is a little bit more authoritative, except in 6 instances where the law follows Abaye, as shall be discussed. And if you would say that here too it is referring to a case where they were identified, like the 5 brothers and the 5 brothers and the 5 sisters, and they're not sure who betrothed who. And if you would say that here too it is referring to a case where they were identified at the beginning and later intermingled, well, that cannot be. This is, as the Baraisa teaches, one of your daughters to one of my sons, indicating that the betrothal could never have been given to consummation, and yet it is a valid betrothal. And the Gemara concludes the refutation of the opinion of Rava is a conclusive refutation. Right? In this case, Rava loses, Abaye wins. And the Gemara notes, and the law is in accordance with the opinion of Abaye when he has a dispute with Rava in 6 instances with regard to 6 halachos, 6 laws, as represented by the mnemonic Yud Ayin Lamed Kuf Gimel Mem, despair. And what are these 6 cases where Abaye wins over Rava? Despair that is not conscious. It's somebody who despairs of losing an item. Maybe he hasn't announced that he, in other words, when you lose property, it's considered to be your property and that you just haven't found it yet. But if a person despairs, or if it's a situation where any reasonable person would despair of ever recovering the property, then that property is understood to be ownerless, and somebody who finds it can keep it. But until that despair has happened, then somebody who finds it has to, put in that work to find the owner, or at least try to find the owner. What about if the person despairs but not consciously? So that's a whole other case, but that's one of those areas where Abaye wins over Rava, despair that is not conscious. Also the case of conspiring witnesses who are disqualified retroactively. A side post when we're creating an Erev. A side post that is standing alone. Betrothal. Kiddushin that is not given to consummation. That's this case. This is one of the 6th. Revealing intent with a get. And an apostate who sins rebelliously. Although the law generally is in accordance with the opinion of Rava in his disputes with Abaye, in these 6 cases, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Abaye. The Mishna teaches an incident occurred involving 5 women, and among them were 2 sisters. I keep coming back to this case. And one person gathered a basket of figs that was from their field. Their field, who? The 5 women? A person gathered, an incident occurred involving 5 women, and among them were 2 sisters. And one person gathered a basket of figs that were from their field, and the fruit was of the sabbatical year. And this man said, "You are hereby all of you betrothed to me with this basket." And one of the women accepted it on behalf of all of them. And the sages said, "The sisters are not betrothed," indicating that the other 3 women could be betrothed, are betrothed. At least there's uncertainty. Rav says one can learn 4 laws from that Mishnah. And the Gemara adds, and Rav held 3 of them in his hand. In other words, he knew what 3 of those were, but he was uncertain about the 4th law that we learned. We can learn 4 laws from them, from this Mishnah. I know 3 of them. One I'm not sure about, right? That's what Rav would say. So Rav clarifies. Learn from it that with regard to one who betroths a woman with produce of the sabbatical year, right? The sabbatical year, when the temple was standing, every 7th year, the farmers would not plant. They would let the land rest in the 7th year. And the spiritual level of the nation, was still high enough as it was when Joshua first led the children of Israel into the land. The produce, the harvest of the 6th year was so plentiful that there would be more than enough to eat for everybody during that whole 7th year when they wouldn't have to farm the land. It was a year of celebration, of releasing debts, etc. The Shemitah year, the sabbatical year. So during that year when you're not farming the land, there's still stuff growing on the land. Can you harvest that even though you didn't plant it? Not sort of industrial harvesting, not for the purpose of bringing in a crop, but just to eat it. Sure, you could do that. It's like it's ownerless. It belongs to whoever picks it up is able to eat from any field. It's an amazing thing, the Shemitah year. So at any rate, Rav says, learn from it that with regard to one who betroths a woman with produce of the sabbatical year, she is betrothed. Why? It's not his crop, right? He's taking food that grew from the land. But that food is deemed ownerless, so that whoever picks it up, it becomes his. So he did the work simply of gathering that food that he needs to eat. Now it's his, and he can use it to betroth a woman, and it is a valid betrothal. And learn from this incident that if one betroths a woman with a stolen item, even if it was stolen from her, she is not betrothed. You can do it with ownerless property that you found, but not with property that you stole, even if you stole it from her. And she forgives the theft. Still, you can't create betrothal with that. You do not say that her accepting from him an item that he stole from her indicates that she released him from his obligation to return it, rendering it his to use in order to betroth her. From where are these 2 laws learned? It is from the fact that it teaches that the produce was from their field and was of the sabbatical year, which indicates the reason it could be used for betrothal is that the produce was of the sabbatical year, which causes the figs to be ownerless property. But if it was one of the other years of the 7-year sabbatical cycle, the betrothal would not take effect because it would be stolen property, stolen from the women. even if she accepted it for her betrothal. And also learn from this incident, a woman can become an agent to accept betrothal for another woman. And this is so even in a situation where she thereby becomes the rival wife of the other, as in this case in the Mishna, right? One woman accepted the betrothal on behalf of all the women. The two sisters were left out because they can't be betrothed to the same man, but the other three unrelated women, one of them was able to accept the betrothal on behalf of all of them, even though thereby they would all become co-wives at a time when a man was permitted to have multiple wives. So that's all the lessons that we learn from this. You can betroth with produce that you pick up in the sabbatical year. You cannot betroth with stolen property, and the woman can act as an agent to receive betrothal on behalf of another woman, even if she thereby becomes a co-wife with that other woman. And the Gemara asks, and what is the other law, the fourth one, mentioned by Rav that he wasn't sure about? It is the law of betrothal that is not given to consummation, that we've been discussing. And the Gemara suggests, and let Rav also count this law. And the Gemara explains he does not do so because he is uncertain whether the correct interpretation of the Mishnah is in accordance with the explanation of Abaye, that betrothal that is not given to consummation may nevertheless become betrothal, or whether it's in accordance with Rava, who said that betrothal that cannot lead to consummation does not become betrothal, does not create betrothal. Now the Gemara relates when Rabbi Zera ascended to Eretz Yisrael from the Jewish community in Babylonia, he stated this law before Rabbi Yochanan, who said to him, "Did Rav actually say that?" This indicates that Rabbi Yochanan disagreed with the statement of Rav that these laws can be learned from the Mishnah, which leads the Gemara to ask, but didn't Rabbi Yochanan say this? And didn't Rabbi Yochanan say, if one robbed another of an item and its owner has not despaired of recovering it, neither of them can consecrate the stolen item. This one, the robber, cannot consecrate it because it is not his to consecrate. And that one, the owner cannot consecrate it because it is not in his possession. So by the same logic, one should not be able to betroth a woman with stolen property, as it is not his. And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yochanan was not objecting to Rav's opinion. But this is what he said to him. Did Rav actually say in accordance with my opinion? And the Gemara raises an objection against Rav's opinion that one cannot betroth a woman with stolen property. No, come on. It must be the case that a man cannot betroth a woman with stolen property. He's got to give her something of value that is his to give. How could you possibly object to that and say, no, it's not true? One can betroth a woman with stolen property. Well, what would be the circumstances of that? Look at this Baraisa, Tosefta 4:5. If one betrothed her with an item taken in robbery, in a forced transaction, or in theft, or if he grabbed a seller from her hand and betrothed her with it, she is betrothed. And this indicates that one can betroth a woman with stolen property. And the Gemara answered, there it is referring to her stolen property. And by accepting it from him as betrothal, she indicates that she has released him from his obligation to return it. So that would still not jibe with this case of the guy who picked up produce from their field, the women's field, and it seemed like it was only a valid betrothal because it was during the sabbatical year, indicating that if it was not the sabbatical year, the fact that he took produce from their field would make it like stolen produce, and how could he betroth them with it? But here's the Baraisa saying you can betroth with stolen property. How does this happen? Well, you can't be stolen from some other third party, but according to this Baraisa, if you steal it from her, and then she says, it's okay, you can keep it. And then you use that property to betroth her, then it's okay because she already made it yours. She has released you from the obligation to return. She said, keep it. Okay, maybe she shouldn't have done it in the first place, but she didn't care. And now she's saying, keep it, so then maybe it becomes the man's property, and that's what he's betrothing her with, his own property. The Gemara asks, whoa. But from the fact that the last clause of the Baraisa teaches, or if he grabbed a coin of hers, that's what it said in that Baraisa at the end. Well, wait a minute, that's where he's talking about stealing it from her. But what about those earlier examples? Maybe that's just stolen property and not from her. And you could still create betrothal with that? Right? The Gemara says, but from the fact that the last clause of the Brisa teaches, or if he grabbed the sella of hers, it may be inferred that in the first clause, we are dealing with property stolen from other people. And the Gemara explains, no. These are not two separate cases. Instead, the Tana of that Brisa is explaining his earlier statement. If one betrothed a woman with an item taken in robbery, in a forced transaction, or in a theft, how so? For example, if he grabbed the sella from her hand and betrothed her with it. Now we're in 52b. But the Gemara challenges this analysis. But doesn't the Mishna that we're dealing with here deal with a case where the stolen item is hers? And yet Rav says she is not betrothed. And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. This case in the Baraisa, where it says that you can betroth with stolen goods, it's referring to a situation where he had already arranged to betroth her beforehand, which indicates that she has released him from his obligation to return it. But in that case, in the Mishnah, it's referring to a situation where he had not arranged his marriage in advance with her, so it is stolen property and she is not betrothed. And the Gemara relates there was a certain woman who was washing her feet in a vessel of water. And a certain man came along and he grabbed a few dinars from another person and threw them to her and said to her, "You are betrothed to me." Real romantic fella. The man subsequently came before Rava to inquire as to the status of that woman. Rava said, there is not anyone who is concerned for this opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who said, in an ordinary case of robbery, the owner has despaired of recovering the stolen item and therefore belongs to the robber. Rabbi Shimon said that, but no one listens to him. Rather, the assumption is that the owner has not despaired of recovering the stolen item. Therefore, the thief, the robber, doesn't own it. And if he doesn't own it, he can't betroth a woman with it. And there is no betrothal if he uses stolen property to attempt to create betrothal. The Gemara relates another incident. Let's compare. There was a certain sharecropper who betrothed a woman with a handful of onions taken from the field where he worked. Another romantic fella. He came before Rava to ask about the status of the woman. Rava said to him, "Who relinquished these onions to you? Since the owner did not allow you to take them, they are stolen property and the woman is not betrothed." The Gemara comments, and this matter applies only to a handful. But if he took a bundle of onions and betrothed the woman with them, the sharecropper can say to the owner, "I took a bundle, you take a bundle. One bundle for another bundle." Since in any case, a sharecropper and the owner of the field divide up the produce, then the man can say, "I took from my half of the produce that I share crops with the owner. So what I betrothed her with was my property to use, and therefore it is a valid betrothal." The Gemara relates yet another incident. There was a certain brewer, right, a beer maker, who was making date beer for someone, and he betrothed a woman with sediment from the beer. This seems to be the most romantic fella yet. The owner of the beer came and found him, and the owner said to him, "Why don't you give her the betrothal from this, the sharp sediments that are of better quality than the kind you chose in your misguided desire to create betrothal?" And the brewer came before Rava to ask whether the owner's comment indicated that he had relinquished his rights to the sediment, which would mean that the woman is betrothed. And Rava said to the brewer, "The sages said that if the owner discovers that someone has taken something of his without permission and says, 'Go and take the item of better quality,' that is a sign that he agrees with the man's action only with regard to teruma," right? So if this brewer wanted to render the beer that he's making tithed, and so he's going to remove some of it to give as teruma to a priest, and then the owner comes along and says, "Oh, you took from my stuff to give teruma? Well, if you're going to give it to a priest, at least take of the finer quality stuff." So we would accept that the owner is relinquishing his right to what the brewer took, and so the brewer is no longer guilty of theft or misappropriation, and what he took, it's okay, more or less, with the owner, but we make that assumption only with regard to teruma. the fact that he made such a comment, maybe you should give her a finer quality, doesn't mean that the owner is okay with the fact that this brewer took from the beer in the first place. Now, the Gemara explains the previous statement. As it is taught in a Baraisa, in the Tosefta Terumos 1.5, when did they say that in the case of one who separates teruma without the owner's consent, his teruma is teruma? The Baraisa clarifies it's in a case where there was someone who entered another's field and gathered produce from it, and he separated teruma without the owner's permission. If he is concerned that the owner will object to his actions and view it as robbery, then his teruma is not teruma. But if he is not concerned, meaning assumes that the owner will not object, then his teruma is teruma. In other words, if my good friend Bill has an apple orchard, and many times, Bill and I have gone for a walk, and as we're coming home, we're passing Bill's field, and I say, oh, you have really nice apples. And Bill says, come and take apples for yourself anytime you want. I got so many apples, I don't know what to do with so many apples. Anytime you're walking by, you want to take a bushel of apples, a basket of apples, go right ahead. So then I have good reason to understand that he won't object, that when next time I come walking down this road, I can take a basket of apples. Now that I've picked the apples myself, they need to be tied, so I separate teruma for them. So the teruma that I took from apples that weren't really mine, but I know that Bill won't object, that teruma is teruma. But if Bill and I never had such a conversation, I just walked onto his property and took a basket of apples and said, well, I'm going to make them more mine by separating teruma from them. No, they're not my apples, and my teruma is not teruma. And from where, so the Bryce explains, and from where would the gatherer know whether he should be concerned that the owner objects and views it as robbery or not? Well, if the owner came and found him separating teruma and said to him, go take the produce of better quality and separate teruma from that. Then if the produce of better quality than the produce he had separated is found, his teruma is teruma, since the owner is assumed to have been sincere and pleased that the other has separated teruma from his produce. But if not, his teruma is not teruma, as it may be assumed that the owner was angry at him and was speaking sarcastically. And the Bryce adds, if the owners were gathering and adding to the teruma that he had separated, indicating that they agree with his act of separation, either way, whether or not better quality produce was found, the teruma is teruma. And Rava concludes the explanation of his ruling. The law applies only to teruma, which is a mitzvah that the owner must in any case perform for the apples from his orchard. But here, in the case of the brewer who betrothed a woman with sediment from the beer, can't believe I'm reading those words. In the case of the brewer who betrothed the woman with sediment from the beer, the owner acts because of embarrassment. And while he does not feel comfortable protesting, he did not in fact relinquish his rights to the sediment, and she is not betrothed. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 8. Here comes Mishnah number 9. In chapter 2, with regard to a priest who betroths a woman with his portion of offerings, whether he did so with offerings of the most sacred order or whether he did so with offerings of lesser sanctity, she is not betrothed. Right? So we've been talking about if you're going to betroth a woman, you have to betroth her with something of value, and that thing of value, it has to be yours so that you have the right to give it to her. You can't give her something that doesn't belong to you. So what about a priest and offerings? Well, for example, we know that when the temple was standing in Jerusalem and a person would bring a sin offering, part of that offering would be burned up on the altar, and part of that offering would be eaten by the priests. So that's a very holy portion of the meat of the offering that could only be eaten by priests, and I believe only in the temple. It's not like you could take it home. So it's his to eat. Can he betroth a woman with that? Let's see. With regard to a priest who betroths a woman with his portion of offerings, whether he did so with offerings of the most sacred order or whether he did so with offerings of lesser sanctity, she is not betrothed. One who betroths a woman with second tithe, right? In the tithing process, when the temple was standing, first 2%, teruma, goes to a priest. Next 10% to the Levite. Next 10% after that, Meiser Sheni, second tithe, used by the farmer, the grower, the one who created the produce, in most years of the sabbatical cycle to, fuel his trip, his pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the festivals. like the one we're in right now, Sukkot, right? So one who betroths a woman with second tithe, whether unwittingly or intentionally, he has not betrothed her. Even though it's his to use for the pilgrimage festival, it's his to use for the pilgrimage festival, not for betrothal. He has not betrothed her. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says if he did so unwittingly, he has not betrothed her. But if he did so intentionally, then he has betrothed her. Perhaps because what he's essentially doing is borrowing against his second tithe. He's going to have to replace what he used to betroth her, but it's under his control, so maybe he can use it for betrothal and then replace it. Let's see. And with regard to one who betroths a woman with consecrated property belonging to the temple treasury, do you think you can betroth a woman with property that was yours until you consecrated it, pledged to give it as a gift to the temple treasury? Now that's hekdesh, right? It's consecrated, it has been made holy. If you make any use of that kind of property, an animal that has been designated for an offering, or an animal that has been designated as a donation to the temple treasury, or money that has been designated, consecrated for the temple treasury, if you use that money or that animal, if you harvest wool from the sheep, if you use the donkey to pull your cart, any use for your benefit is a sin. That is me'ilah. That is misappropriation of consecrated property. So how could you possibly use such property for betrothal? Let's see. And with regard to one who betroths a woman with consecrated property belonging to the temple treasury, if he does so intentionally, he has betrothed her. And if he does so unwittingly, he has not betrothed her. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says the opposite. If he does so unwittingly, he has betrothed her. But if he does so intentionally, he has not betrothed her. How is this possible? Let's see. The Gemara on Mishna number 9. The Gemara suggests, shall we say that the Mishna is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, as it is taught in a Baraisa that the verse states with regard to the obligation to bring an offering for taking a false oath concerning unlawful possession of property of another person, quote, if anyone sin and he commits a trespass against the Lord and deal falsely with his neighbor in a matter of deposit or of pledge or of robbery or have oppressed his neighbor. Very interesting. Right there in that verse, they're equating trespass against the Lord with trespass against another person. Stealing from a person is like stealing from the Lord. Why? Because the Lord is the master of the universe. He has said who has what portion. Now, it may seem unfair to us that there's wicked people who are rich and incredibly righteous people who are poor, but it's not given to us to understand the distribution of wealth and resources in the world. We don't understand it. But what we do know is that it is absolutely against the Ten Commandments and against the Sheva Brachos B'nai Noach, right? The 7 commandments that are that obligate all human beings. All human beings include no stealing, right? So when you steal from another person, then you are stealing from the Lord, since the Lord owns everything anyway. It's His world. Right, and He has decided who will have what for right now. Right, could change in a moment, but right now, that guy has owned something, and if I steal it from him, it's like I'm stealing from the Lord. Very important concept. At any rate, as that verse, Leviticus 5:21, is discussing property belonging to another person, the phrase "a trespass against the Lord" serves to include in the obligation of an offering a false oath with regard to possession of offerings of lesser sanctity of another person, which are property of the owner. This is the statement of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, right? Like when you're bringing the Pesach, right? You're going to bring the Passover lamb at Pesach, so some of the blood's going to go up on the altar, the rest you're going to bring back with you to the group that you're registered with, and you're going to eat it that night of Passover, right? So that is an offering of lesser sanctity compared to what goes up in smoke on the altar. But you can't take it, even though you can't take it. Let's just keep going. But the Gemara objects to this. Well, you can even say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, as Rabbi Yosei HaGalili says that an offering of lesser sanctity belongs to its owner only while the animal is still alive. But after it is slaughtered, it does not belong to the priest who receives portions from it. So what is the reason for this? When the priests receive their portion after the animal has been slaughtered, they receive their portion from the table of the Most High, and they do not own the portion itself. Right? In other words, this is a way to understand what priests receive when they're given the portion of sin offerings that is for them to eat. It's not that it's been given to them as their property. It's that they have an invitation and therefore a right to eat from the table of the Most High. But it doesn't mean that they own it. So that would be another reason why you can't create betrothal with that. Now the Gemara adds, the language of the Mishnah is also precise as it teaches with regard to a priest who betroths a woman with his portion of offerings, whether he did so with offerings of the most sacred, like a sin offering, or whether he used offerings of lesser sanctity, he has not betrothed her. And the Mishnah does not speak of a priest who betroths a woman with a living offering of lesser sanctity, but one who betroths her with the portion of the slaughtered animal that he has received. And the Gemara concludes, learn from it, that it is only in this case that she is not betrothed. Now the sages taught, after the death of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda said to his students, do not let the students of Rabbi Meir enter here into our house of study, because they are vexatious. And they do not come to study Torah, but rather they come to overwhelm me with laws and arguments, right? They just come to argue. They don't come here to learn. Now, Sumachos, who was a student of Rabbi Meir, pushed and entered his way into Rabbi Yehuda's study hall. And he said to them, this is what Rabbi Meir taught me. With regard to a priest who betroths a woman with his portion of the offerings, whether he did so with offerings of the most sacred order or whether he used the offerings of lesser sanctity, he has not betrothed her, right? That's the law that we're learning. Upon hearing this, Rabbi Yehuda became angry with his students. He said to them, didn't I say to you, do not let the students of Rabbi Meir enter here into our house of study because they are vexatious and they do not come here to study Torah, but rather they come to overwhelm me with laws. Rabbi Yehuda explained his objection to the statement of Rabbi Meir. This law is not relevant. As from where would a woman appear in the temple courtyard? There's no women allowed there. No Israel is allowed there. Only priests are allowed there, and there's no such thing as a woman priest, in Judaism. So what would a woman be doing there that this priest who's receiving a portion of the sin offering, for example, would, hand it to her in order to create betrothal? It's an impossible hypothetical. Rabbi Yosei, who was present as Rabbi Yehuda was having this outburst, said, well, people will say that Meir died, Yehuda grew angry, and Yosei remained silent, and what will become of the words of Torah? So he said, in fact, the law is relevant. Yehuda, calm down. This law is worth examining because this impossible hypothetical is not impossible. It could happen. How could it happen? In fact, this law is relevant. But isn't it common for a man to, isn't it common for a man to accept betrothal for his daughter? Yes. Isn't it common for him to accept betrothal for his daughter in the temple courtyard? There is no need to give the betrothal item directly to the woman. It can be given to her father. And additionally, isn't it common for a woman to designate an agent for herself to accept betrothal, even in the temple courtyard? And furthermore, what would be the law if the woman pushed and entered? Okay, she's not allowed to be there, but let's say she went. Okay, she might be guilty and have to bring some kind of an offering for the fact that she trespassed on a part of the temple courtyard where she's not allowed to go. Okay, that's a separate issue. Now that she's here, what if a priest tried to betroth her with a portion of his offerings? Can he create betrothal that way? Was a betrothal created? I'm very close to done. If your questions or comments, please get them in now. It is taught in a baraisa that the sages discuss the issue of a priest who betroths a woman with his portion of offerings of the most sacred order. Rabbi Yehuda says she is betrothed, and Rabbi Yosei says she is not betrothed. Rabbi Yochanan says both of them derive their opinions from one verse, which states that the priests have a right to a portion of the offerings of the most sacred order, but they explain the outcome in two different ways. The verse states, this shall be yours of the most holy things, reserved from the fire. That's Numbers 18:9. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that the term yours indicates that the portion of the priest, that the portion that the priest receives is intended for you, i.e. a priest, including for all your needs, right? It's not that the priest just has a right to eat it. It's that it's given to him. And once it's given to him, it's his. And so if it's his, he can betroth the woman with it. Rabbi Yehuda's position is not crazy. And Rabbi Yosei holds that the verse compares the priest's portion to the fire on the altar. Just as the portion burned on the fire is for the fire's consumption, so too the priest's portion is also for consumption alone, and not for any other purpose, right? So says Rabbi Yosei, okay, there's a part of the sin offering that's given to the priest to eat, and them eating it is part of the atonement process of the person who brought the offering. It's not that the priest can take that meat and go sell it, or betroth a woman with it, or do something else. He has to eat it because that is what is given to him to do, not, just to go use it for whatever he wishes. And that's what we're going to knock off. And tomorrow, God willing, special time. It's Hoshana Rabbah, musical Hoshana Rabbah, going to be going at it all day. Definitely not going to be ready for our normal time of noon Pacific. Aiming for 3 p.m. I'm probably going to have to leave early because it's such a, crazy, uplifting, amazing davening. We'll start at 8 a.m. and we'll probably still be going at 3 o'clock, but I'll try to leave early and be here and teach tomorrow's page at 3 p.m. Pacific, with apologies to the East Coast. Shabbos is probably starting soon after that for you. But you can catch the replay after Chag. I just don't want to fall any further behind. So tomorrow's class, 3 p.m. Pacific. Okay, questions on Kiddushin 52. Bill Eldridge. So one may take from the fields in a sabbatical year for one's, and I assume one's household's immediate use. Right. Does that mean one can take in grain to make flour and thus bread? Or can one only take such food as one can eat, as it were, on the spot? I'm not entirely sure, but pretty sure you could take it, grind it, and make bread. I have to check, but I think. Not guaranteed. Bell, onions, stolen money, beer dregs, all of this makes my small, sweet pearl engagement ring look like the height of romance. Amen. Beautiful. Thank you. Bill, I feel like there was some reason to value the sediment of a beer vat. Yeah, I think so. Like the fact that they're talking that the owner might want to keep it and the guy's using it. Maybe the sediment in a beer vat is actually like sourdough. You know what I mean? It's like what makes the next batch possible. I don't know. It just sounds so bad, right? But Bill says, I think there was some reason to value the sediment of a beer vat. I think the sediments could be used to make another kind of alcohol, sort of like how we use former bourbon barrels to age wine now. This is all by way of saying this guy is still a schmuck, but maybe not quite such a schmuck. Well said. Yosef, do the sages ever use examples of betrothal from their own marriages in this tract? Yeah, I think we've even encountered some stories about, one of the sages seeking to betroth a daughter. But typically, those examples are not going to be that interesting. Why? Because the sages are going to be meticulous. And they're not going to create, careless cases of uncertainty. And therefore, when they do things properly, there's no question to debate. It's when other people make mistakes and, try to do one thing and end up doing another, that's where the interesting legal debates ensue. And finally, Yosef, conversely, I would say that if you give freely, you are freely giving to Hashem. Right, so if you steal from another person, you are stealing from Hashem. Conversely, if you're giving charity to people who need it, if you are giving freely, giving gifts and giving charity, then you are giving to Hashem. Beautiful, Yosef. That's absolutely the converse. That's excellent. I would say that is true, in my opinion. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, see you tomorrow, Hoshana Rabbah. Look for me to go live in the middle of the day from our musical Hollow, and we'll do our class at 3 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night. P.S. If you're still here, we started the Facebook page for our movie, Man in the Long Black Coat. Check it out. There's a link to it right on the Accidental Talmudist Facebook page. Make sure you like Man in the Long Black Coat Facebook page so you don't miss pictures and stories and updates from production on our road to the big release.